The Zyros Empire had underestimated Earth. That was their first mistake. When they first encountered humanity, they saw a primitive species, small and weak compared to their towering, multi-limbed warriors. The Zyros had a history of conquering lesser species, assimilating their worlds, and moving on. Earth would be no different, they thought. They couldn't have been more wrong. The invasion began swiftly. Thousands of Zyros ships entered Earth's orbit, flooding the skies with their sleek, menacing vessels. The world's militaries scrambled, but they were no match for the advanced alien technology. Within hours, most major cities had fallen. Power grids failed, and humanity found itself on the brink of extinction. But even as the lights dimmed across the globe, something inside the human spirit refused to yield. In the rubble of New York City, Major Sarah Connors led a small band of survivors, most of them civilians. The Zyros had taken the city in an overwhelming assault, their weapons cutting through tanks and soldiers like paper. Yet, in the heart of the devastation, there was a quiet resistance. The survivors had no advanced technology, no warships, and no superpowers. They only had one thing left, their will to fight. Sarah wasn't a strategist by birth, she'd been a schoolteacher before the invasion, but in the chaos, she'd become something else. A leader. A fighter. They had no hope of defeating the invaders in a conventional battle. But Sarah knew that humans were good at one thing, surviving against the odds. Gather the others. We have a plan, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion etched on her face. The small group of survivors had been hiding in the ruins of a collapsed skyscraper for days. They were hungry, scared, and outgunned. But they had a reason to keep fighting, Earth. Her team, consisting of former soldiers, engineers, and civilians, nodded. They were desperate, but they weren't broken. For weeks, Sarah's team had been studying the alien technology, scavenging what they could from wrecked ships and studying the Zyros' tactics. One thing became abundantly clear, the Zyros had a glaring weakness. They weren't invincible, they were simply overconfident. They had assumed Earth's defenses would crumble in the face of their superiority, and they were wrong. We hit them where it hurts, Sarah said. We make them fear us. We make them know, there is no corner they can hide in where we won't reach them. The first step of the plan was already in motion. Sarah had led a small team of engineers to hack into one of the downed alien ships. Using makeshift tools and scavenged parts, they had managed to rig the Zyros' own communication system. Now, the humans could listen in on every tactical decision the invaders made. The enemy was no longer a faceless force, they were individuals with weaknesses, just like anyone else. But it wasn't enough to know the enemy's plans. Sarah knew that humanity had something the Zyros could never understand, unpredictability. The human mind was capable of thinking in ways the invaders couldn't even imagine. In every battle, the Zyros followed predictable strategies. They struck where they knew the humans would be weak. But what they didn't account for was the human ability to adapt, to improvise on the fly, to fight when all seemed lost. As the team worked through the night, assembling homemade explosives and weapons from salvaged alien tech, Sarah had a quiet moment of reflection. The Zyros had come to Earth with the belief that they were the apex of intelligence and strength. They thought humanity was just a stepping stone, a species to be conquered, crushed under their boot. But Sarah had seen something different in her people. She had seen them fight through impossible odds, and she knew that the Zyros had no idea what they were up against. Humanity wasn't just a species of survivors. They were fighters. And when cornered, they didn't give up. They adapted, they fought, and they found new ways to win. We'll take back our cities, Sarah whispered to herself, and we'll make them understand, no one fights harder than a cornered human. The night passed in tense silence, with only the distant sounds of explosions echoing through the ruined city. Every moment brought the humans closer to the first strike of their insurgency. A cornered animal was dangerous. But a cornered human? That was something else entirely. As dawn's first light broke through the smoke and dust, the survivors prepared to put their plan into motion. The Zyros thought they had Earth under control. But they hadn't reckoned on one thing: when humans are pushed to the edge, that's when they fight the hardest. And no matter how big or strong the enemy might be, humanity always found a way to survive. Sarah Connors and her ragtag team of survivors had just begun their war. And it was going to be one the Zyros would never forget. The first strike came at night. It was a small, strategic hit, a direct assault on one of the Zyros' communication hubs in downtown Manhattan. The survivors had spent days setting up the ambush, quietly planting explosives on key buildings, and positioning themselves where the Zyros wouldn't expect them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a statement. The humans were still here. Sarah stood at the head of her team, watching as the alien patrols passed by the narrow alley where they lay in wait. The Zyros' technology made them formidable opponents, cloaking fields, energy shields, and weaponry that outmatched anything humanity had ever dreamed of. But they lacked one crucial thing: the ability to think like humans. As the first Zyros patrol walked into the trap, Sarah gave the signal. Explosions rocked the city streets, sending plumes of fire and debris into the air. The Zyros were caught off guard, their advanced armor taking the brunt of the damage but failing to protect them from the sheer force of the blast. The humans fought with everything they had, throwing improvised grenades, using whatever alien weapons they'd managed to scavenge, and relying on their wits to stay one step ahead. For every alien soldier that fell, 2 more replaced them, but Sarah's team had made their point: the Zyros could no longer operate unchecked. They had been forced into a battle of attrition, one they didn't expect to lose. The fight had changed from one of overwhelming might to one of survival and willpower. It was no longer about technology. It was about humanity's resilience. The survivors fought through the night, retreating to safe houses when the Zyros launched their counterattack. But every encounter was a success. A communication hub sabotaged here, a weapons cache destroyed there. Each victory, small as it seemed, caused a ripple effect through the invaders' ranks. The Zyros, who had once believed humanity would crumble, began to see the true power of a cornered human: unpredictability, resourcefulness, and a refusal to stop. Sarah and her team gathered in the safety of an underground bunker after their successful mission. They were exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, but their spirits were lifted. They knew the Zyros were watching. They knew their tactics were being scrutinized. But they were no longer afraid. "We're doing it," said Private Carter, one of Sarah's soldiers. "They're getting frustrated." "They should be," Sarah said with a grim smile. "We've got them right where we want them." As the team regrouped, Sarah felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. The fight wasn't just about New York. It wasn't even just about Earth. It was about humanity proving that they would never be cowed, never be crushed underfoot, and never surrender. She could see it in the eyes of her team: they had gone from survivors to warriors. And every victory was one more step toward taking back their world. But they weren't done yet. The Zyros were adapting. They'd learned to deploy new countermeasures. Larger patrols. Advanced drones. But Sarah had learned something too. While the Zyros were cold, calculating, and efficient, they didn't understand the emotional drive behind a human's fight. They didn't understand what it meant to lose everything, to have no other choice but to stand and fight. Sarah's mind raced as she thought of their next move. The Zyros weren't just here to invade, they were here to break humanity's spirit, to destroy their morale. Every day, they expected humans to surrender, to flee into the shadows and abandon hope. But Sarah knew better. Humanity would never lose hope. As long as one person was left standing, the fight would continue. "Tomorrow," Sarah said, "we take the fight to their headquarters." The room fell silent. The stakes had never been higher. The Zyros' main stronghold was heavily guarded, almost impenetrable. But if they could strike there, if they could land a blow to the very heart of the Zyros' power, then everything would change. The Zyros would finally understand that humanity was not a species to be dismissed. Major Connors looked at her team, each one weary but determined. They had no illusion of easy victory. But they had something stronger than fear or doubt: a reason to fight. A reason to win. "We'll make them feel the cost of underestimating us," she said. "And we'll make sure they never forget, no one fights harder than a cornered human." And as the team prepared for their most dangerous mission yet, they understood the truth in those words. The Zyros might have the technology, the power, and the numbers, but humanity had something that no empire, no matter how vast, could ever understand: the spirit of the fight. And that was something the invaders would never break. The sun had barely risen, casting a dim light over the decimated skyline of New York City, but Sarah and her team were already preparing for their most daring assault yet. Their target was the Zyro Central Command Hub, an impenetrable fortress built deep within the heart of the city. It was here that the Zyros coordinated their operations, sent out orders to their forces, and enforced their rule over the planet. To strike it would be to cripple their entire operation, to deal a blow so significant that it could spark a change in the balance of the war. But the risks were enormous. Sarah paced back and forth inside the command center, which had been hastily constructed in the basement of an old subway station. Maps were spread across tables, hastily drawn plans marked in red, and each member of her team seemed to be working in focused silence. The tension was palpable, but Sarah could sense something else too: anticipation. They were ready. "We've got one shot at this," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of the moment. "We hit them hard and fast. No hesitation. We won't get a second chance." "Understood, ma'am," said Sergeant Hale, the grizzled veteran who had become her most trusted right-hand man. The plan was simple: strike fast, hit the command center with everything they had, and leave before the Zyros could react. The humans had learned that stealth and speed were their greatest assets. While the Zyros could overwhelm their opponents with sheer force, humanity's ingenuity had always been its greatest weapon. The team would use guerrilla tactics, blinding flashes, EMPs to disable Zyros tech, and whatever resources they had at their disposal to destabilize the enemy. They moved in silence, cutting through the broken streets of the city. The remnants of humanity's former life, abandoned cars, broken glass, and overturned buses, served as both barricades and hiding spots. The Zyros, with their towering war machines and precise patrols, had grown accustomed to controlling the urban landscape. They had no reason to expect the humans to be brave enough, or foolish enough, to attack them on their own turf. But that was where they were wrong. Sarah's team arrived at the base of the Zyros command fortress, a towering structure of alien metal and reinforced glass that gleamed ominously in the morning light. Armed drones buzzed overhead, their sensor arrays scanning for any signs of disturbance. But Sarah knew the key to their success: the element of surprise. "We've got about 5 minutes before the next patrol swings around," Hale whispered, checking his watch. "Do we make our move now?" Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively brushing against the rifle slung over her shoulder. She wasn't just leading a fight for survival, she was leading a revolution. "Now," she said, voice unwavering. The team split into 2 groups. One would breach the main entrance, causing a diversion, while the other would infiltrate from a hidden maintenance tunnel beneath the building. The Zyros had relied on their overwhelming presence to secure their base, but they hadn't anticipated humans thinking in unorthodox ways. As they moved, the tension in the air grew thick. A few quiet moments passed, then, with a flash, the first group triggered the EMP devices. A blinding white light flooded the area, sending the Zyros drones spiraling into disarray as their electronics shorted out. For a brief moment, the aliens were blind, unable to track their attackers. It was all the humans needed. Gunfire erupted as the first group fought their way through the main entrance. Sarah's team, using the chaos to their advantage, slipped inside through the maintenance tunnels, moving through the labyrinth of alien technology. They were in the belly of the beast now, and every step was a calculated risk. They reached the central control room, a cavernous space filled with holographic displays and alien consoles. At the heart of the room stood a massive Zyros commander, a towering figure whose 6 arms were a blur as they manipulated the complex alien systems. Sarah's breath caught. The commander was one of the highest-ranking officers the Zyros had deployed on Earth. If they could take him out, the entire chain of command would be disrupted. The Zyros' response time would plummet. But it wasn't going to be easy. The commander was surrounded by a personal guard, elite warriors trained to protect him at all costs. "On my mark," Sarah whispered. "We do this fast and clean." As the team positioned themselves, Sarah couldn't help but think of everything they had sacrificed to get this far. So many had already given their lives to this cause, too many. But their fight had never been about glory. It had been about something far more powerful: survival. The human spirit was an indomitable force, and it had survived the worst of what the Zyros had thrown at them. Now, they were on the verge of dealing the invaders a crippling blow. Sarah's pulse quickened as the moment approached. They had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just them and the Zyros. If they failed, it would be the end. But if they succeeded... Go! The firefight erupted in a split second, gunfire echoing through the command center. The Zyros' personal guard moved with terrifying precision, their weapons cutting through the air. But the humans had learned how to fight the Zyros, how to outthink them, how to find weaknesses. The battle was brutal, the enemy far more powerful, but the humans fought with an energy the Zyros had never seen. Sarah reached the commander, her rifle raised. In one swift motion, she fired, sending a powerful pulse into the Zyros' torso. The creature staggered, its 6 arms flailing. The humans were relentless. No one fought harder than a cornered human. With a final push, the Zyros' commander collapsed, his once mighty form crashing to the floor. The control room systems sparked and shut down, the entire fortress falling into chaos. The first victory in what would become a series of them. But the fight was far from over. Now, the Zyros knew that they were not the unstoppable force they believed themselves to be. Now, they knew that humanity had found a way to fight back, fiercely, intelligently, and with unyielding resolve. And Sarah Connors knew it was just the beginning. The sounds of destruction reverberated through the heart of the Zyros' command center. With the commander dead and their control systems in disarray, the alien forces quickly scrambled to regain control. But it was too late. Sarah and her team had already made their mark. The Zyros were no longer operating on the assumption that humanity would roll over. They were now facing an enemy who could think, adapt, and strike back in ways the Zyros never expected. The humans had hit them where it hurt most, their leadership. As Sarah and her team made their way out of the command center, they moved with precision, picking off straggling Zyros soldiers and cutting down any patrols that might stand in their way. But as they neared the exit, Sarah's heart sank. The Zyros had responded faster than she anticipated. The building trembled as the Zyros began to deploy reinforcements, more heavily armored troops, larger drones, and automated turrets that seemed to sprout from every corner. "Fall back!" Sarah shouted, signaling the team to retreat. There was no time to waste. The element of surprise had been their advantage, but it was running out. If they didn't make it out of the facility soon, they would be trapped. The team moved through the winding tunnels, retracing their steps to the maintenance shaft they had originally entered through. The sound of Zyros' boots echoing in the hallways behind them made their every footstep feel like it might be their last. The enemy was closing in on them faster than expected, and the tight spaces of the underground were not going to offer much protection once the Zyros adapted. "Keep moving. We're almost there," Sarah urged, her voice barely audible over the gunfire and distant explosions. She had seen her team in action, she knew their skills, their grit, but now, she could see the strain on their faces. Their earlier victories had energized them, but the reality of facing an alien force this advanced was beginning to weigh on them. The fight had become a war of attrition, and the Zyros were starting to take this seriously. "We've got company," Private Carter yelled as a Zyros drone rounded the corner, its glowing eyes locking onto the retreating humans. It was one of the larger models, heavily armored and equipped with energy pulse weapons capable of vaporizing anything in its path. The drone fired, sending blasts of searing energy down the hallway. "Take cover," Sarah commanded. The humans scrambled to hide behind rubble, debris, and crumbling walls. The team's makeshift weapons were no match for the drone's advanced shielding, but Sarah wasn't ready to give up just yet. This wasn't a fight they could win head-on. They had to outsmart it. "Carter, on me!" Sarah called. Carter, who had grown accustomed to following her orders without question, moved quickly to her side. "I need you to disable its targeting system. We'll use the EMP grenades to take down its shields. You distract it, and I'll make the shot." Carter nodded, pulling out a small EMP device from his pack. The drone was relentless, tracking their movements with terrifying precision, but Carter was quick on his feet. As the drone advanced, Carter darted from his position, drawing the drone's attention. The powerful pulse weapons fired, but Carter was faster. He moved, weaving through the destroyed tunnels, always staying just a step ahead of the drone's deadly blasts. Meanwhile, Sarah crouched behind a rusted beam, calculating the perfect moment to strike. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took aim with a modified Zyros plasma rifle. She could hear the faint crackling of the EMP device as it buzzed to life in Carter's hands. The drone's sensors started to flicker, its targeting system disoriented by the electromagnetic pulse. Now or never. With a steady hand, Sarah squeezed the trigger. The pulse blast hit the drone directly, and in an instant, its shield flickered, then collapsed. The drone's lights dimmed as it lost power, collapsing in a heap of twisted metal and sparks. The team cheered briefly, but there was no time to waste. The explosion of the EMP grenade had undoubtedly alerted other Zyros to their location. They were already too deep in enemy territory to afford another firefight. "We move now," Sarah barked, leading her team through the maintenance tunnel, where a narrow exit awaited them. They weren't out of danger yet, but every step brought them closer to safety. When they finally emerged from the underground shaft and into the city streets, the sight that greeted them was both overwhelming and bittersweet. The Zyros had launched a full-scale counteroffensive. What had once been a city in ruins was now a battlefield, as alien war machines clashed with the remnants of Earth's military forces. But there was no turning back. Humanity had made its stand, and the Zyros were beginning to realize that they had made a grave mistake. "We've hit them hard," Sarah muttered, surveying the destruction around her. "But this is just the beginning. They won't stop coming." The team regrouped, ready to continue their fight. But as Sarah looked at their battered faces, she saw a glimmer of something stronger than fear in their eyes: resolve. The humans were no longer fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. Across the battlefield, the Zyros were regrouping. They had lost their leader, their central command, and the confidence that they had once taken for granted. The first battle had been won, but Sarah knew the hardest part was still ahead. The Zyros were ruthless, and they would come back with everything they had. But humanity had learned something in their brief victory: no one fights harder than a cornered human. And as long as there was one human left to stand, the fight would go on. The streets of New York, once a symbol of humanity's greatness, had become a battleground of desperation. The city was a ghost town, reduced to rubble under the weight of the Zyros' relentless assault. But Sarah Connors and her team had shaken something deep within the alien invaders. They had proven that humanity was not just a species to be conquered, but one to be feared. In the days following their successful strike on the Zyros command center, the Zyros had launched a retaliatory assault unlike anything the humans had faced before. Waves of heavily armed soldiers, towering war machines, and orbital bombardments flooded the city. But instead of breaking, humanity adapted. They became the hunters. Sarah's team was no longer operating as a small guerrilla unit. They were part of a growing resistance, a movement that had spread from New York to other parts of the world. What had started as a few ragtag survivors fighting to stay alive had morphed into a coordinated global effort to push back the invaders. Every city, every nation, every rebel force now shared one goal: take the fight to the Zyros. Sarah and her team had become symbols of resistance, their faces plastered on makeshift posters, their deeds whispered in every corner of the world. They were no longer just soldiers, they were leaders in a war that transcended borders, ideologies, and differences. And their mission had grown more ambitious than ever before. The Zyros, meanwhile, had become increasingly paranoid. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Despite their superior technology, they struggled to adapt to the unpredictable nature of the human fight. Where they once relied on overwhelming force, they now found themselves scrambling to contain an enemy that refused to stay down. Sarah, standing in a commandeered building-turned-command center, surveyed the latest intel. The resistance had made significant progress. Several key Zyros facilities had been sabotaged or destroyed, and human forces were now coordinating coordinated strikes to dismantle the alien infrastructure. But Sarah knew that every success came at a cost. The Zyros were far from defeated, and they would fight back with all their might. "We're running out of time," Major Connor said, her voice filled with urgency as she analyzed the intelligence reports. "We need to hit their primary supply lines. If we can cut off their resources, we can turn this fight in our favor." "Agreed," Sergeant Hale said, glancing over the data. "But we're not just talking about a raid. We'll be facing their best defenses. This isn't going to be easy." Sarah nodded. She had known this mission would be a turning point for the resistance. They needed to break the Zyro stranglehold on Earth, and the primary supply lines were the key. Without those resources, the alien forces would be crippled. The plan was set: infiltrate the heart of the Zyro supply chain and sabotage their infrastructure. It would be a high-risk operation, but the potential payoff was immense. The team would need to strike fast, hit hard, and get out before the Zyros could mobilize their full retaliation. As Sarah prepared for the mission, she reflected on how far they had come. Just months ago, humanity had been on the brink of extinction, helpless in the face of an advanced alien force. Now, they were fighting back, and each victory was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. "We've got this," Sarah muttered to herself, looking out at the crumbling city. No one fights harder than a cornered human. The night of the mission arrived, and Sarah's team slipped through the wreckage of New York, carefully navigating their way toward the Zyro's heavily guarded supply facility. Their movements were fluid, practiced, a well-oiled machine in the face of an alien enemy that had grown increasingly paranoid. The facility loomed ahead, a massive, heavily fortified structure surrounded by layers of energy shields and automated turrets. It was guarded by some of the Zyro's elite warriors, a force that would overwhelm them if they weren't careful. But the humans had a secret weapon: their ingenuity. The resistance had learned to repurpose Zyro's technology and use it against them. They had developed their own cloaking devices, EMP grenades, and jamming tools to disrupt the alien sensors. But what truly set them apart was their ability to improvise. When they didn't have the firepower, they used strategy. When they didn't have the numbers, they relied on surprise. The team moved into position, each member wearing the weight of the mission on their shoulders. They were ready for this fight, for this chance to show the Zyros that they were no longer the hunted, but the hunters. "On my mark," Sarah said, her voice calm but laced with determination. She glanced around at her team, Hale, Carter, and the others, each one a vital part of the machine that had brought them this far. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. "Mark," she said. The world erupted in a flurry of noise and chaos as the team stormed the Zyro's facility. EMP grenades disabled energy shields, allowing them to breach the outer defenses. The Zyro's automated turrets were neutralized, and human soldiers swarmed into the heart of the compound. The alien forces fought back with everything they had, but it was clear they had underestimated the humans. They hadn't counted on this level of coordination, on this kind of resistance. Sarah's heart pounded as she led the charge, making her way toward the central control hub. Once they disabled the supply lines, the entire Zyro's operation would be thrown into disarray. The Zyros, for all their advanced technology, could be broken. They reached the control room. But as they fought their way through the last line of defense, Sarah felt something shift. The Zyros were desperate now, fighting not just to hold their ground, but to crush every last trace of humanity's resistance. The team had come far, but the true battle for Earth had only just begun. Sarah Connors wasn't fighting just for survival anymore. She was fighting for the future of humanity. And humanity had never been more dangerous. The battle to destroy the Zyro's primary supply lines had been a resounding success, but Sarah Connors could already feel the shift in the air. The Zyros, once certain of their inevitable conquest of Earth, were now in full retreat mode. However, that retreat was no sign of surrender, it was a calculated move to regroup and retaliate with everything they had left. And now, Sarah and her team were faced with the terrifying reality: the Zyros weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to obliterate humanity from existence. In the aftermath of their victory at the supply facility, Sarah's team had barely had time to catch their breath. The strike had crippled the Zyros' resources and disrupted their supply chains, but the cost had been steep. Casualties mounted, and the Resistance's victory was bittersweet, as the Zyros quickly regrouped and began preparing for a devastating counteroffensive. Their next move was going to be the hardest yet, a final push to break the will of the human resistance and reclaim their hold over Earth. "Sarah, we've got a problem," Sergeant Hale said grimly, approaching Sarah as she looked over the latest satellite images. "The Zyros aren't retreating, they're preparing something big. This doesn't look like a counterattack, it looks like they're building up for an extinction-level strike." Sarah's heart sank as Hale pointed to the images on the screen. The Zyros had begun constructing enormous weapons platforms on Earth's orbit, massive orbital bombardment satellites that could turn entire cities to ash with a single shot. The weapons were unlike anything humanity had seen, even in the most apocalyptic of dreams. The sheer scale of destruction they could unleash was enough to wipe out the human race in one fell swoop. Earth's last hope was fading. "They've figured it out," Sarah muttered. "If they launch those satellites, it's over." "We can't let them," Hale said, his jaw set in determination. "We've already shown we can hit them hard. But this time, we'll need more than just our typical guerrilla tactics. We need to hit them where it hurts, deep. We need to take those platforms out." Sarah's mind raced. The plan was risky, suicidal, even. The orbital platforms were protected by fleets of Zyros ships, their defenses nearly impenetrable. Any attempt to assault them head-on would be met with immediate destruction. But if the humans had one advantage over the Zyros, it was their ability to adapt. They had learned how to fight a technologically superior enemy in ways the Zyros couldn't predict. If there was a way to stop the orbital bombardment, Sarah was going to find it. "We have to take them down," Sarah said firmly. "But we can't do it from the ground. We need to get on those platforms. We're going to need a team with specialized training. A stealth mission. If we can infiltrate their shipyard and disable the weapons before they're activated, we might just stand a chance." A plan formed in Sarah's mind, an all-or-nothing mission to infiltrate a Zyros shipyard on the dark side of the moon. It was humanity's best shot. The team would need to sneak past the alien ships, disable the shields protecting the platforms, and sabotage the launch systems. If they failed, Earth would be nothing more than a smoldering ruin. "We're going to need the best," Sarah said, locking eyes with Hale. "This is going to be the toughest mission we've ever undertaken." The operation was set into motion. Within hours, Sarah's team was gathered in a secure military base, alongside a handful of specialists who had been handpicked for their skills. A group of engineers, hackers, ex-pilots, and reconnaissance experts were all brought together under one banner: humanity's survival. As Sarah and her team prepared for the mission, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. It wasn't just another fight, it was their last shot. If they didn't stop the Zyros, Earth would fall, and the human race would be reduced to dust. The stakes had never been higher. "We have one shot at this," Sarah told her team in a rare moment of vulnerability. "There are no second chances. If we fail, we're done." The team stood in silence, the gravity of her words sinking in. But they knew something that the Zyros didn't: humanity didn't just fight for survival. They fought for something more, for family, for freedom, for the future. And even if it meant laying down their lives, they would fight for that until their last breath. the mission to the moon was swift, a quiet, covert assault. The Zyros had no idea what was coming. Using specialized cloaking technology, the team infiltrated the Zyros' moon base, evading detection by the Zyros' advanced sensors. As they moved deeper into the heart of the facility, Sarah's thoughts were a mix of determination and quiet dread. This was their moment. But would they make it in time? The team navigated the maze of Zyros technology, a network of mechanical wonders that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Their goal was clear: disable the launch systems and prevent the orbital platforms from firing. "We're in," Carter whispered as he hacked into a nearby terminal, deactivating the outer security systems. "Just a few more minutes, and we'll be inside the core control room." But the Zyros had learned from their mistakes. The human resistance had been relentless, and now, as the team moved closer to their objective, the facility's defenses were activated. Alien drones poured from hidden chambers, and automated turrets sprang to life. The humans fought their way forward, their weapons flashing in the dim light, each shot another testament to their will to survive. Just as Sarah reached the core control room, the ground trembled. A voice, cold and mechanical, echoed throughout the chamber. "Target lock initiated. Earth's destruction in progress." "No!" Sarah screamed, her heart racing. The Zyros had already begun the countdown. The final battle had begun. There would be no turning back. In that moment, Sarah realized that the only way to save Earth was to make the ultimate sacrifice, to give everything to destroy the weapon and guarantee humanity's survival. The choice was clear. "Do it," she ordered her team. "Destroy the platforms, now." They had no other choice. It was the last stand of humanity. And no one fights harder than a cornered human. The countdown echoed through the control room, a mechanical voice signaling the end of all things. "Earth's destruction in progress." The cold, robotic tone sent a chill down Sarah Connor's spine, but there was no time to waste. The Zyros' orbital platforms were moments away from firing. Humanity's survival rested in the hands of Sarah and her team. "We can still stop this," Sarah muttered, her voice tight with urgency. She turned to her team, their faces grim but resolute. The core control room was surrounded by advanced Zyros tech, but it was clear now, this wasn't just a mission to disable weapons. This was humanity's last shot at redemption. It would take everything they had, but they had no other choice. "Get to the launch sequence," Sarah ordered. "I'll handle the defenses." Private Carter, their hacker and tech expert, immediately moved to the central terminal. The glowing screen lit up his face as his fingers flew across the console. The facility's power systems flickered in response to his commands, but the Zyros were quick to react. An alarm blared, and suddenly, the walls seemed to come alive with Zyros drones, emerging from every corner, their weapons trained on the humans. "Go, go, go!" Sarah barked as she dove for cover, firing her rifle. The drones advanced with terrifying precision, but the humans had learned how to fight back. The team moved as one, systematically taking out the Zyros' forces with an efficiency born of desperation. "Carter, how much longer?" Hale called over the roar of gunfire, his voice laced with urgency. "Almost there." Carter shouted back, his eyes glued to the terminal. "I just need a few more seconds. Don't let them get through." Time was slipping away. The Zyros' counterattack was relentless, and Sarah could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. With each passing second, the countdown drew closer to zero, but they couldn't stop now. Not when Earth's future hung in the balance. "Sarah, we've got incoming," Carter warned. Through the terminal's interface, he saw more Zyros reinforcements flooding the base, this time, the Zyros' elite combat troops. The stakes had never been higher. If they didn't finish their mission in time, the Zyros would obliterate everything. Sarah made a snap decision. "Hale, get to Carter. I'll hold them off." Without waiting for a response, she sprang to her feet and rushed toward the entrance, firing at anything that moved. The sound of Zyros soldiers charging through the hallways, their battle cries filling the air, only pushed Sarah to fight harder. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when there was still a chance. Her rifle clicked empty. She quickly switched to her sidearm and kept moving, refusing to let up. This is it, she thought to herself, feeling the weight of the entire planet on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Carter worked feverishly, sweat dripping down his face as his fingers danced across the holographic display. The Zyro's security systems had been far more complex than anything he'd encountered, but he had no choice but to push through. Earth's last line of defense was in his hands. Come on, Carter muttered under his breath, hacking into the mainframe to disrupt the final defense protocols. He could hear the gunfire from the entrance, the steady thud of footsteps drawing nearer. His heart pounded in his chest. Just a few more seconds, Carter whispered, almost to himself, as the countdown on the screen flashed in red. And then, with a sudden hiss of the system's shutdown, the countdown stopped. The terminal screen turned from red to green. The Zyro's orbital platforms were no longer primed to fire. We did it, Carter breathed, a sense of triumph filling the room. But Sarah didn't hear it. She didn't have the luxury of time to celebrate. Zyro's soldiers were flooding into the room, their energy weapons crackling with deadly intent. With no time left, Sarah made the most important decision of her life. She reached for the last remaining EMP device on her belt and slammed it onto the ground in the center of the room. Get back, she screamed, pushing Carter and Hale toward the exit. But before they could move, the device activated, releasing an electromagnetic pulse that ripped through the facility, disabling every Zyro system in its path, including the drones and turrets. The room went dark, the pulse cutting off all power. The Zyro's forces were temporarily neutralized, but the humans knew it wouldn't last long. The team had bought themselves precious moments. Move! Now! Sarah shouted, her voice now a command as she grabbed Carter's arm and pulled him toward the exit. As they raced through the corridors, the Zyros began to regroup. The mission was a success, but at what cost? Their escape was as chaotic as the assault itself. With every corner they turned, they encountered more alien soldiers, their cold, unfeeling eyes fixed on their prey. But the humans pressed forward. In the final stretch of their escape, the facility began to crumble as the EMP's effects began to overload the remaining Zyro systems. The countdown to Earth's destruction was halted, but now, the entire base was collapsing in on itself. The explosion of the facility's core was imminent. Go! Sarah yelled, her voice commanding. The team sprinted toward the escape shuttle that had been prepped for their exfiltration. Just as they boarded, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The base was now nothing but debris. As the shuttle ascended into the sky, Sarah stared back at the growing chaos. She felt the pulse of victory surging through her veins, but also a deep, unshakable exhaustion. The Zyros had been stopped, but only for now. The war was far from over. And as the team looked out at the stars, Sarah couldn't help but think, humanity had proven one thing to the Zyros. They would never stop fighting. They had fought back against impossible odds, and now, the Zyros knew the truth. No one fights harder than a cornered human. And they would never lose. The final words of the mission echoed in Sarah's mind. Asterisk, we're still here. Asterisk. And with that, the humans set their sights on the stars, ready for whatever came next.